Welcome to the Living Richly podcast. So glad that you are able to join us again this week. And for the first time, I think, in our Living Richly's podcast history, we are having a guest back to talk about their subject again, because we just simply couldn't cover it all in one episode. And so it's great to have Don Lachance back with us again this week. And I just want to, right out of the gate, you talked all last week with us about grief and some of the challenges that we have when it comes to expressing grief, to leaning into and learning grief. Why is this such a compelling topic?
Because grief and loss affects everybody.
Right.
And we've been so conditioned to not deal with it. There's so much to unpack when you do begin to dabble in, like, the emotional turmoil that surfaces when you experience grief or any form of loss in the intangible formats.
Yeah. So, Don, you're a grief and loss specialist, and that's the reason why we've had you on again for a second week to look into this. And it is interesting because grief is one of those topics that people don't like to talk about.
Right.
Until they start. and
why don't we just come right at it? We had a conversation just as we were setting up today and getting ready to go. We've talked about the stages of grief, because that's certainly what I've been told and what I've grown up understanding. There are specific stages that you walk through, and yet you had a pretty interesting spin on that. So we're going to be debunking a lot of myths today. I think part of transformation is changing people's mindset. And we want to come at some of the falsehoods or the misunderstandings people have about loss and grief. But stages of grief, what do you think?
Well, I don't really. I look at it as just a really comfortable way for people to compartmentalize emotional turmoil. Because we're so accustomed to not dealing with anything. And when you peel back the curtain and you look at what the stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, that was all of her work, it was really geared towards people who were being diagnosed with a terminal illness. And so I understand the emotional angst that surfaces with that. So I can understand denial coming into play, anger, wanting to barter. And not that we don't experience any of those emotions when we do experience loss or grief, but they certainly aren't a convenient way or a good way through any of the turmoil that we're battling to not experience. Because here, on the denial front, if you have a wife, a mother, a husband, a sibling die, how are you going to deny that?
Right.
You can't.
Right.
You can't, right? Yet, when I'm diagnosed with a terminal illness, there's a part of me that doesn't want to go there, and the denial element can play a significant role.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, I've got a pathway that's allowing me to compartmentalize everything and move through things comfortably. And grief and loss, gentlemen, is the farthest thing from comfort.
Yeah, no kidding. And I heard today, actually just this morning, on a podcast, they were talking about grief, and we often talk about grief and loss as the loss of a loved one, someone who passes away. And that certainly is a major expression of it that most people have been touched by in one way or another. But it can also be the loss of the life you wished you would have had.
Absolutely.
Right. It can be we talked about this on the first episode. So what I'm hearing you say is they're not
that
really.
was the episode. That was the podcast you were listening to. Right?
I was re-listening to the last conversation.
All of a sudden
you just outed me on the show. No, but that they're not really stages so much as emotions that people experience. Because I know folks that with the stages, using that model, so many feel now I'm doing grief wrong. Because I'm supposed to be here and I'm experiencing this.
Yeah.
So I've heard it explained, well, they're not necessarily linear. But I think the whole concept of the stages is possibly what's messing things up for people.
Well, it can, because you're not focused on dealing with what's really surfacing. You're looking for something that you're trying to fit into a category.
Right.
And like, how uncomfortable can that be?
Yeah.
When you're not skilled at it to begin with. Like, and everything, everything about the grief element and the loss elements. That's the hardest thing for a lot of people to come to terms with when we talk about the different forms of loss, like the intangible losses that we experience, things like loss of innocence, loss of self-worth, loss of value. And the list goes on and on and on. That's grief. You're grieving.
Right.
But we don't really want to attribute it to that because we haven't lost anybody close to us. There hasn't been a death.
It's almost like when you kind of put them into these categories and you compartmentalize grief, you take out the personal experience of it, right? Grief is such a personal thing. It's hard to define because how you grieve and how I grieve, there's going to be some similarities, but there's going to be lots of differences based on all kinds of elements to that. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I would, because we're experiencing that emotional turmoil. How we deal with it are completely different.
Yes.
Because every relationship on the face of the planet is 100% unique. So identical twins who lose a parent, one twin can't say to the other, I know how you feel.
Right.
Because the relationship with the person who's no longer there was completely different, 100% unique. And those are the things. So how do you step into that? You know, where do you begin to even look?
So I was talking to a 76-year-old farmer yesterday, brand new client of mine, who's in the final stages of looking to take retire, take his retirement, looking to exit from the farm and everything else. But he has never invested in his life. All he's done is work hard and farm. And so I was talking to him about the need to start defining what it is that matters to you and what's important, start designing a life outside of work. Because we know most people, when they retire and they haven't done that, it doesn't take them long before they start to lose their minds. Like they have no sense of purpose anymore because they've only defined themselves one way. And I had the conversation with them about, you're going to grieve this stage of your life. You're opening a new chapter. When you finally close that chapter, start a new one, there will be this loss that you will experience. Is that something you've seen as well?
Absolutely. Like the end of any relationship causes grief. We experience loss.
Right.
So, you know, it's not always in death. It's not always in an emotional angst. It's not always about that. 76 years of him farming, and he's going to wake up tomorrow because he's decided to stop that. And where does his day begin?
Right.
Where is he? He's at a complete loss. And what's he sitting with? The discomfort of that. No longer my routine. That is over. The relationship with who he was is over.
Right.
It's not because he's going to want to keep clinging to it. Well, I'll just do this today or I'll just do that today. And never really begins to accept the identity that's surfacing in regards to who he truly is.
Right.
It's interesting. I don't know if this is, and maybe you've done the research on this, because I just recall here, there was a stats of whatever the number is, but people who pass away shortly after retiring. And I don't know if there's some accuracy around that they've recorded some stats. We'll have to do some research on it, but the notion of, and it's probably exactly that, is because they don't grieve that, they don't figure that stuff out, that all of a sudden they don't wake up with, they don't know what to do the next day, and they're lost. And many of them don't survive years for many years after.
But I love the redefinition of loss. That it's
so good.
That it's not just, yes, absolutely, death is a loss. That when we lose someone close to us, I remember losing my dad in 2008, and that really shook me in a pretty powerful way. For a while, not very powerful. It was actually quite damaging. I didn't deal with it very well. Didn't know how to process that properly. Made some decisions that I would end up regretting, right? But you learn from it nonetheless. But redefining it as the loss of anything meaningful that is no longer part of your life, right? So whether that's a relationship with your career, a relationship with a friendship that for some reason or another was it Henry Cloud who wrote the book Necessary Endings? I know the title. I'm struggling with the author.
We'll put the book in the show notes. Sure.
But Necessary Endings, he talks about how we struggle with that as human beings. The end of things. We have such a hard time with it because we want it to continue. We don't want it to end because I think we get comfortable.
Well, yeah, like we get comfortable because we're not having to deal with it.
Right.
We park it. We always want to push it aside.
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting. You used a term while you were describing some of that, and the term is process. Because we have an evidence-based process that comes out of the Institute for walking people through that. When I meet with people for the very first time, I apologize up front that, like, you are going to find me intrusive, but I guarantee them in the same breath that they will never find me invasive.
That's a great way to put
powerful.
it. Yeah.
Powerful.
Because my purpose in somebody experiencing the depth of their loss, the depth of their grief, is all based on asking questions.
Right.
And I probe. And, I've talked about this, and I think I mentioned it on the last series when I was in here the last time, that I hear what people say, but I listen for what they don't.
Yes.
Right.
Because that provides you with a much deeper level of questions to ask that connects them to their pain.
Yeah.
Because when people turn to us, and when I say us, I'm referring to specialists that come out of the Institute, it's usually because of an event that's occurred that's undeniable.
Right.
Right? And they turn, they're looking for help. We get like the pleasure of letting them know that it was really the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, that what you're dealing with is a lifetime of loss.
Right.
And that's sobering for people because part of the process we walk them through is taking them, if you want to get into the process now, are you comfortable doing that?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Let's jump in. When we look at that, you take somebody back to dawn of conscious memory. Holy crap, like...
Sorry, say that one again.
Well, you take somebody back to their dawn of conscious memory.
Dawn of conscious memory.
Okay. Not Don Lachance.
Not Don Lachance.
Not Don of... Okay. Not the grandpa of grief, master of disaster, the king of Spain.
Yeah.
No, the dawn of conscious memory.
You think about that. So
I don't know where that came from.
When I did
I wish to apologize to all the living rich.
No, don't.
I was feeling uncomfortable, so I defaulted to humor.
Well done.
Which is common, right?
All right.
But when you think about that, when you take somebody back to their dawn of conscious memory, and I say that because when I did my work, my first memory of a loss-based event was me tethered to a tree on King Edward. And the reason I remembered being tethered to the tree was my dog was leashed to the front porch, and I couldn't reach my dog, and he couldn't reach me. Here I was, like 2.5, maybe, tethered to a tree, experiencing loss of freedom, loss of choice.
Right.
Not that I was cognizant of any of that, but that's what's going on in my psyche. Yeah. And we go through life experiencing all of those events. And when you get someone to graph out their loss history and they look at the amount of loss that their life is made up of, man, what a daunting exercise. What an uncomfortable place, because all you're talking about now is what they've experienced that got them in turmoil, and they don't know that there's a pathway through any of this. They have no clue. All you're doing is bringing up all of this, like, incredibly uncomfortable things for them.
All right. So there's the first. Take us through the rest of the process. Solve it all for us.
Solve it all for us.
No pressure.
You know what would be really cool? And if someone was willing, would be to walk through a process.
Okay, so before we do it, maybe let's try this. We put a question out to the Facebook group.
Sure.
So now I don't know if this can work in this context of what you're suggesting because the person's not here for you to follow up questions, but maybe let's try it and then see how that works.
Let's give it a go.
And so do want to encourage, again, if you're not, we've got the link. We're going to have that in the show notes, but we'll also put it on the screen. We do have a private Facebook group and we have all kinds of conversations. We elaborate.
Amazing community.
Lots of people that are talking about the different episodes. We ask questions in advance and we did that. We asked questions saying that we're going to be doing these series on grief and what do you have. And Kerri, one of our longtime listeners, she wrote this. I'm just going to read hers, what she said, and then let's talk about how you would walk someone like that through some of the process. She says, I'm an expert at discontinuing from my emotions as a way of not feeling overwhelmed or unable to cope. A sensitive person who is always scanning my environment for perceived threats. I've developed a thick force field over the years. I guess my mom died a little over a year ago. ago, and I still feel like I haven't connected to any feelings of grief. I'd love to hear some tips on how to connect with and process grief, particularly when there are challenges in a relationship that went unresolved and there was already an existing feeling of detachment.
Well, that's a mouthful, Rob, because when you think of it, like from my perspective, Kerri's claim in there to not having connected to grief yet is really opposite of what's unfolding. She is so connected to grief that she can't really move through with anything else. And nobody is there to really allow her or give her permission to connect to that deep-rooted pain and break. One of the very first things I realized when I got into this work, I'd meet people in public places, and watching somebody break in a public place is very uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
Not so much for me, because I knew what was coming. I was expecting it, but began to realize that like the Zoom environment became the perfect place for people to connect, because they were in safe places, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And now you can connect them to it, because out in public, watching somebody connect to that, and you get the it starts, and then you see the break, and instantly they plug into all of the conditioning that the world's provided them with to not feel bad, to suck it up, to feel like, not feel. So in Kerri's place, it's not that she's stepping away from it. Like she can't. She's so embedded in that turmoil, in that loss, and that pain, hasn't been able to express it, hasn't been able to talk to anybody about it.
Do you think part of it is with that is when I hear someone say I haven't been able to connect to grief? I've said it. When I say that, I know for me, when I think I'm not connecting to the grief. I talk about it with my daughter's death, that it took me 15 years to truly start to grieve her death, or what I thought was, again, because I was defining the grief was a set expected emotions that I had to release, right? And I wonder if when Kerri used that language, or when people use that language, I haven't connected to grief, is what they're really saying is I haven't connected to what I perceive to be the proper emotions to express in that moment.
That right. And again, like, let's take it all back to the conditioning of how conditioned we are to not feel bad.
That's one of the myths, right? That you talk about that needs to be debunked.
Absolutely. To not feel bad, replace the loss, you know, and the examples are plentiful. Like as a kid, you lose a pet. Right? You go to mom or dad and you're crying and you don't know how to deal with it. And what does dad say? Oh, don't worry. We'll get you a new pup on Saturday.
Right.
Or you just replace the pup with a matching one without telling the kid.
Well, there's
dark, man.
dark, but it's
yeah.
but it's a reality.
Right. Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Think about that.
Replace the goldfish.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? When you ask somebody to think about something, take a step further, and how do they feel about thinking about that?
Right.
Because now, like, there's that exchange that starts to take place, and it's within self. How uncomfortable can that be? Because, wow, I think I know who I am. I think I know how I deal with stuff. And then something unfolds, something occurs, and I'm out to left field. Like, I don't know how I'm going to deal with it.
Right.
And so you're trapped.
Yeah.
Right? And who's going to walk you through that process? Who's going to tell you it's okay for you to cry about that? And if you need to sit here for an hour and continue to cry until that has gotten to a place where there's no more pressure,
right?
No more internal pressure. But who creates space like that for people?
Right. Yeah. That's tough stuff. And she talks about, and I appreciate, Kerri, I know you're going to be watching, you're going to be listening. You're not here to kind of fill in the blanks as we're talking here. And so, we appreciate you, your question, and us kind of using it as a way to explore, the subject matter more fully, this really important topic. She makes an important point. She says, the dynamic of when you've lost someone and things go unresolved. There was, we talk about finding closure. Can you talk to us about your view on finding closure? Because I think many of us are seeking it.
Holy crap. Like, first of all, from my perspective, closure is the wrong word to be using because think about what closure means. Shutting off, disconnecting. And it's the last thing you want. You're looking for opening. You're looking to open up Pandora's box. You're looking to like create pathways for people to express the pain, the anger, the anxiety, the frustration, all of it. Because if you lose like a parent, it's not the first loss you've ever experienced. I'm sure you've got classmates, you've got friends, like, you know, you've got a lifetime full of loss. You're just not connecting to it.
Right.
And that's the hard part. That's why, like, the very first step in this process is to walk someone through their loss history. And when you get to look at how much loss your life is comprised of, holy mac, like, what an uncomfortable state to be in. The good news is there's a pathway to recovery.
Right.
Because every one of those loss-based events involves a relationship of some form. So now we choose a relationship that has caused some of the greatest turmoil. I'll sit and I'll listen as they begin to just document their loss out, and I'll pretty much know what relationship they should choose, but I always want to give them the option of choosing that, right? Because in every relationship now, there are positive events that take place, but there's a lot of negative events that take place.
Right.
And there's a delta there. And so what does that really mean? As we begin to move through that and they look at the relationship on a graph now of the highlights and the lowlights and all of that, it starts to paint a much different picture.
Yeah.
And we stand on the outside of all of this looking in and still unaware of how we move through it. What do we do? So as we move through the process and we work through an actual relationship, then we begin to introduce recovery components. Okay. And the recovery components surface in the form of apologies, forgiveness, and significant emotional statements. Because what's really happening with us when we're really, I guess, overtaken by loss and the strong emotions that come with it is just this inability to really be able to plug in and complete emotionally. And we talked about it in the last episode in regards to your daughter, anchored to pain around 6 words, right?
Yes.
Different, better, more, that really deal with past issues and hopes, dreams, and expectations, the things that we got robbed of, the things that we never got a chance to experience. Incredible amounts of loss in that, yet no event occurred.
Right. It's just an unfulfilled expectation or dream.
And I think when people use the language of closure, and I appreciate so much how you're, again, because words do matter.
Words really matter.
I think in some cases they're thinking, and I recently put a post kind of celebrating my daughter and really just recognize and honor and talked about that I'm in my place today is in the grieving process. And correct me here. I mean, listen, I give you permission to challenge this just as you did without permission last week.
He was intrusive, but not invasive. We actually call that uncomfortable, but never unsafe.
Yes. Yeah. No.
I like that.
And I talked about the notion of like, I don't grieve as in sadness when I reflect on my daughter. I don't, that's so because oftentimes I hesitate when I post something to kind of recognize either her birthday or the day that she passed away. I get a lot of people right away, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And they're right into that. And part of me wants to say, hey, no, that's not, it's okay. Like I'm good. And I think the way I worded it this time was trying to kind of say that. Now, and that goes to a bit of the myth of time heals all wounds, right? This notion of just give it time.
Yeah.
But at some point, as someone is grieving something, there is that point, I think, at least it was for me, where the shift happens from it being a sadness to a reflectiveness, I guess. It may be that the right word. Am I right on that, or do I just need a ton more work?
Well,
that's
That's
a loaded question.
I just opened up the door for that
well,
one.
no, that like it is a loaded
healing with Rob Dale.
No, welcome to the healing of Rob Dale.
Right, yes. Yeah.
When you think about that, right, it's because you've processed those emotions. Right. You haven't dodged them. You haven't put them in a box. You haven't stuck them in the backpack.
For a long time.
Yeah, well, of course, because who gave you permission to feel the pain?
No, and especially in the world where I don't grieve as those who have no hope.
Right. We didn't permission.
I lived in a world where you didn't grieve because she's in a better place.
Yeah.
I just saw somebody post something exactly like that on Facebook. They said, why do Christians get sad when someone they love dies who they know is going to heaven? Shouldn't they be happy for them?
Wow. See, people say things that, although may be intellectually accurate,
right,
they're completely void of any emotional value.
Right.
And we're talking about an emotional state.
Yeah.
And so to say something, okay, that's based on a belief,
right,
that somebody has. The griever isn't thinking about that. The griever's thinking about not being able to talk to that cherished person.
Yeah.
You know, and we do mention it, and it's a topic that comes up. We experience mixed emotions when death occurs, especially in light of, let's look at a parent that's been suffering with whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Part of us is happy.
Yeah.
That they're no longer suffering. They're no longer in pain.
My story with Dad. The two-year battle with lung cancer. Never smoked a day in his life. I watched him, his physical state deteriorate from one of strength and to he was a fraction of the man. I remember still my mom calling me one day, asked me to come over. They only live 5 minutes away, and Dad had collapsed in the bathroom. And I remember the experience of having to pick my dad up off the floor and bring him to his bed. And even as
I can see it. Yeah. It's very visible.
No.
So it was hard. It was hard to watch that. So when he passed, there was this sense of, at least he's not suffering anymore. Right. And yet deep anger for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, anger really allows us to isolate. It keeps people away, right?
Well,
it's how we manage
It's
people.
the only move I've got.
Yeah. Well, when you think about
humor,
it.
As a guy.
And humor.
Anger
and humor. Yeah, you got two.
Oh, you just saw both.
Dude.
Oh, see, this is show and tell.
You see, I am multifaceted.
Yeah.
I've got two moves.
I've got two emotions. I can express freely.
Don, don't let him off the hook. You were leaning in here, and he's like going, no, look at this.
I was leaning in here.
And Don, it's so great to have you on the show this week, folks.
See, and it's the humor, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's the reality of that situation. You were connecting to that and likely elements that you haven't had a real opportunity to process. And they come up because now, all of a sudden, it's no longer the dad you knew that's the hero, that's the strong, that's the all of it. You're looking at this frail entity, wondering, how the hell did I get here? More importantly, how did he get here, and how did I allow something like this to happen? So, loss of any involvement. And so, the part of us is grieving, who he was prior to the death, prior to the demise. There's all of this turmoil around it's not really your dad.
Yeah.
Not the dad I knew. Do I want to connect you to that? Absolutely, I want to connect you to that. But I think you've done enough emotional work to experience what you were just experiencing right now. And you can probe that. You can freely go on and have a good look at that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think of the loss of control during that time, the loss of faith. There was so much going on that would lead to a big major transition in my life. Loss of, although I don't regret that too much now, but loss of a whole season of my life.
Community,
loss of community. There was just so much wrapped up in that.
Yeah. One of the elements that I became aware of and very uncomfortable with, and is it okay to address altar calls?
That some of our audience may not know what that means. We might need some explanation.
I think it warrants like a mention, and because it's a great example, right, of whitewashing and not really accepting responsibility. And what I mean by that is longtime churchgoer on a worship team. So during altar calls, BB here got to sit behind the safety of his drums and watching people respond.
Right.
And I'm not being judgmental. I'm just being an observer here. I would see the same people getting up for the same altar call.
Yeah.
Every time it occurred.
Yeah. For our listeners, an altar call was simply at the end of a church service,
church,
where folks were invited if they felt moved by what had been shared by the minister. It used to be you and I and others, right? But would be invited to come forward to the front as a sign of sort of accepting or surrender or whatever. And so that's whatever. In that world, that's called a call to the altar, I guess would be another the way to put it.
And not that I'm trying to make anybody uncomfortable, but what I'd constantly see occur would be people and we're instructed to just turn your burdens over to God, right? To the Lord. And for me, it's always fallen into the same category as like, I love you with the love of the Lord.
Right.
Like, I hate you. You're an asshole. But I love you with the love of the Lord.
My favorite t-shirt, Jesus loves you, but I think you're an asshole.
So, but when you think about that, and here's all these people coming up for these altar calls. And they're handing over their burdens. They're handing over their strife.
Are they though? Like,
well, no. And that's
right.
You're saying that God. Why did God not take them? Right? Because that's what we're literally. I was talking to someone yesterday about they were talking a young guy that's a young business leader that I'm working with, and when he first reached out to me a few months ago, it was a really bad place, both personally, professionally. Been walking him through the model of living richly, discovering your best life, designing your best life, and he's just coming alive. It's just amazing to watch the joy. And he started to talk to me about, well, now when I start to feel in a funk, or I start to feel off, or I feel bad, I just go and do something else. I just shift my state. And I said, okay, actually that there are times where that is the right strategy. Sometimes getting up, going for a walk, go to walk the dog, go work out is a great strategy. I said, the problem with it though, it can become a numbing strategy, but you're numbing with good things, but you're still avoiding sitting with your pain.
Sit in the grief.
Well, so I remember people telling me that for years, Eric, you just need to learn to sit with those bad emotions. I go, what the fuck does that look like? Like, I don't know what it means to sit and now I do, but then I didn't.
Right? Let me finish my point in regards
I interrupted
to... No. It's okay. No, you didn't, because like what you've got to say is really important.
He avoided you.
He's dodging.
I'm dodging.
It's an emotional dodge. I know what it is.
See what I'm doing? We're going to run out of time.
But
everyone sees what you're doing.
To get to my point, why doesn't it work?
Right.
Because they haven't accepted the responsibility of ownership for the flaw that they're looking to have addressed. And you cannot give away something that you don't own.
Mic drop.
Whoa.
It's impossible. Same thing with grief.
Right.
You can't hand over the discomfort until you've accepted that responsibility. You see, the awareness, the acknowledgement, and the acceptance. And it ties into our competency levels, right? We've even got expressions for it. And I don't know if I mentioned this on the last episode. Ignorance is bliss.
Right.
How comfortable is that? Like, happy-go-lucky. I don't have to worry about anything, right? And an asshole like me comes along and makes you aware of something. Holy crap. Now all of a sudden, your competency is challenged because now you are consciously incompetent.
Yeah.
Who's going to stay in that place?
Yeah.
What am I going to do?
Yeah. When early in this process, part of what spawned this whole experience.
Define process for me.
The evolution of this podcast, the Living Richly movement, the whole thing, right, was conversations that started between three of us. And I remember when I had my second great awakening, I call it. My first great awakening was in 2017 after I hit the wall pretty hard. In spring of 2022 was my second one, where a series of events took place, and it drove me back into work that I'd been avoiding. And I literally, my life changed. A bunch of stuff that I'd been working on for years just landed. And I remember just reflecting on what does it mean to live your best life, to live richly. And you'll remember this. To me, it's having full access to all of the resources of the mind, the heart, the body, the spirit, having full unrestricted access to all those dimensions of my life. And I think for men, specifically, the heart is a tough one. We are socialized and trained to live with an emotional straitjacket, where it's not okay to feel. It's not okay to show weakness. It's not real men don't cry. How does your work in helping people navigate through grief and own their grief? It's probably the most powerful statement on this entire conversation was just dropped. But how do you see that showing up when you're working with men?
Again, like it's the deep-rooted conditioning. I'm going to use an example that might make you uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it regardless. When you were talking about your dad, what was it that kept you from breaking and actually shedding a tear or experiencing the depth of the emotion you were feeling? When just minutes ago in this conversation, you started talking about the degradation of the body and you were connected to something that's deep-rooted in you. What was it that kept you from allowing yourself to break?
So if that, in a different context, I think I would have showed up differently. When you ask me the question, I'm on right now. I'm here to help people right now. This whole podcast is about helping people. So it's not about me right now. And that's a construct I've lived with a long time. I'm working to deconstruct it.
Okay. I just want to point something out, right? In you sharing that, how many other men are sitting out there saying, this isn't about me? Okay. And this isn't to make you uncomfortable. This is to raise an awareness that
I'm good at being uncomfortable is what I mean.
Men need to hear this, right? People need to hear this.
Yeah.
When you connect to that and you allow yourself to break, that's the first safe place that some men will ever experience that will allow them and provide them with the courage to take their mask off and connect emotionally, some people for the very first time ever.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
It is powerful.
So for us to want to not make it about us because we're here to help, the best help we can provide somebody with is the authenticity of that brokenness that we allow to surface freely, because that is you owning what's yours so that you can give it away.
Right. Wow.
I am so glad the focus is on Eric today.
We're not done yet, Rob. We're not done yet.
Oh yeah, no,
we there. Like, I want you to understand.
Yeah.
Like, this is important.
Oh, this is so good.
I know.
This is important. This isn't about Eric. This is about emotional turmoil and how conditioned we have been to not share on that front.
And I will say this: we have had guests who have shared some pretty powerful stuff. And it's interesting. We've had female guests share some pretty emotional stuff and be comfortable. Well, not comfortable, but will shed tears, apologizing. I remember we had somebody on there. We had somebody on there and they apologized. Oh, I didn't realize this was going to hit me this way. It was right near the beginning of the episode. I guess I could say which episodes. People go back and look. That was the one with Janine, and she got quite emotional tear. And then we have other episodes when Steve was sharing about his son's passing, and you could see you could just see it there, and then shifted gears. Certainly we are conditioned. You're right. me last week. It's us being able to, or even when Eric's sharing and he's getting emotional, that's what I'm thinking is, oh, he's, he's going to break down here. And, kind of, okay, what do I do? Do I just let that? Do we just kind of shift gear? Like, it's interesting to see how, because we're both, I guess, not all of us are so wired to, perform, to protect, to not let that come out. And yet it's probably the best thing that people can see is men. Jesus wept.
Yeah. There's so much, right? Here's a really good example. And you can both be conscious of this. The next time you hug a fellow friend, a man, make sure you're not patting them on the back. Because we are so uncomfortable expressing that emotion that we pat them on the back.
Right.
We're picking up on their discomfort of hugging. What did your mom do when you were an infant to try and soothe you? Patted you on the back. So it takes us right back to that place. If you're going to hug someone, hug them, hold them. Don't pat them on the back.
Yeah.
Don't make all kinds of other things happen. Because be intentional with what you want people to experience from you, your openness.
Yeah. I'm so glad I got one right, because I don't pat people on the back when I hug them. But the next time I hug you, I'm holding on.
You've always
for
wanted
5 minutes. I'm holding on. I'm going to be like,
guy, all right.
Yeah. What's the thing? 20 seconds, right, for the dopamine to get released in a hug?
Minutes?
You can make it what you want, Rob.
Do I look like a professional snuggler to you?
I'm not here to control people. I'm here to set you free.
That's right.
And
That's
if
awesome.
you want to hug
Great.
for 5 minutes,
for 5 minutes, we talk about the importance of language, and in a moment, we're in the interest of time. I know we're going to run. We could sit here and talk all day, and comfort. But you even used the language a moment ago about you're saying, I think Eric's going to break down. Why do we call it that?
Yes.
Why do we call it that? We make it almost shameful. I'm breaking down. Am I? Or am I coming together finally?
Yeah, what a great friggin' shift in statement, right?
That I'm actually connecting with life. I'm not avoiding, I'm not numbing, I'm not self-medicating, I'm not walking through life like some digital zombie, that I'm actually embracing. We heard this from Susan Blaine, that I know you've, are well connected with, and she talked about emotion and how the word motion is in that word, and how when we run from it, when we hide it, block it out, and avoid it, it gets stuck in us. It's supposed to move through us, but we don't know how to do that very well, most of us.
Yeah.
Right.
You see, I love that, right? I'm a constant learner. You speaking that very specific element, why do we call it breaking down? Why can't we call that, wow, I'm really beginning to flex an emotional muscle here, and I'm comfortable doing that?
Why can't the new sexy not be coming together? I'm coming together. I am, especially for men that are watching the show. I think when we use the language, I'm breaking apart. I'm afraid that if I get in touch with it, I know for years I avoided, I tell the story of a vision I had for many years, or a recurring dream about a cabin in the woods and a presence walking me up to the door. And I refused to go in because I knew inside I'd have to deal with some shit. And for years I avoided. And that's what the game that I played. And it's only when I began to really get in touch with the things that had wounded me, and the mistakes that I had made, and the crappy mindsets, beliefs that I had held about myself and the world, could I truly begin to heal. To me, that's courage. To me, that's strength. But I know for a lot of men and women that are listening or watching right now, I'm afraid to get in touch with it because I might fall apart. And I think our words to you is, but what if you came together?
Yeah.
What if that was the beginning of a transformation?
That's beautiful. And you see, I can attribute that to the courage that's across from me at this table here, being willing to talk about some of the uncomfortable things that you experience in a real way. And the reason that we don't use that terminology, and we haven't been able to say, I'm coming together, is because it's so infrequent. But let's change that.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's change that. Here is the birthing of a new term that we can ease people into, because, you know, with the awareness, the acknowledgement, and the acceptance, it's in there, right?
Yeah.
And if there's a word that I could take out of the dictionary when it comes to emotional wellness, it would be strength. What a trap.
Yeah.
What a trap. Courage. Swap out courage, or like strength, for courage in every conversation that you're having, and watch what begins to shift.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
We are needing to wrap up. I want to ask you one more question. Now, last time we asked you, what does it mean to live richly? What does the term living richly mean to you? So I'm not going to ask that again, but what does it mean to live richly in the midst of grief? What does living your best life mean in grief?
Embracing the courage it takes to feel the discomfort without guilt.
Wow. And courage, best definition I ever heard, is fear walking. Fear walking, right? So courage is not some bravado. We're not talking about some kind of macho bravado falsehood here. It's, even as I'm sitting here, and I have been for the last 15 minutes, my whole body's shaking. Right? I haven't felt that on any episode to date. Courage is fear walking.
That's good.
Right.
Thank you, everyone, for being a part of, I think, a pretty profound episode. These have been absolutely great. Really do encourage you to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Don is a part of our private Facebook group, and so you can interact with him if you are a part of the Facebook group. He is in there. He is one of our kind of big supporters within the group. Responds. You can reach out to him and ask questions as part of the group. So we do encourage you, if you haven't already, join the Facebook group. The link is going to show up. We're going to make sure it's in the show notes, but it'll be on the screen as well if you're watching by YouTube. I'm going to encourage you to be a part of that as well. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks to Don.
I don't know if I want to thank Don.
I don't know if
I want to thank Don, and I
Don
don't
will
know,
definitely. You could expect Don back on the show,
or not. We'll see.
Maybe after we rewatch it, I reserve the right to change my mind.
Don will be back on the show, but we are going to have other hosts are going to be here. Steve's going to be sitting here doing an episode with you. No, we want to thank you again, and until next time, get out there and live your best life.